The auction block stood in the center of McGill, Nevada, a harsh wooden platform that had seen too many desperate souls pass across its splintered surface, and Katherine Dawson knew with absolute certainty that today she would become one of them. The September sun of 1883 beat down mercilessly on the mining town, casting sharp shadows across the gathered crowd of men who had come to bid on her future. Their faces a mixture of curiosity, calculation, and something darker that made her stomach twist with dread. She stood with her hands bound loosely in front of her, not because anyone truly believed she would run, but because the rope served as a symbol of what she had become in the eyes of the law and her own flesh and blood. Her brother Thomas had done this to her. Thomas, who she had raised after their parents died in a mine collapse when she was barely 14, and he was just 8 years old. Thomas, who she had worked her fingers raw for, taking in laundry and mending for the miners and their families, sacrificing any chance at her own life to ensure he had food in his belly and shoes on his feet. Thomas, who had grown into a man with more taste for gambling and whiskey than honor or gratitude. He had accumulated debts across 3 counties, borrowed from men who did not forgive or forget, and when they finally came to collect, he had offered the only thing of value he possessed that was not already spoken for: his sister. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice that carried like a whip crack, was recounting her qualities as though she were livestock. 22 years old, healthy, capable of all manner of domestic work, literate, which was rare enough in these parts to merit special mention. Katherine kept her eyes fixed on the mountains in the distance, those ancient peaks that ringed the valley where McGill sat like a collection of toys scattered by a careless child. She would not cry. She had shed all her tears 3 nights ago when Thomas had come home drunk and told her what he had done, told her she had no choice because if she ran, they would kill him. And did she not owe him this after all he had endured growing up without parents? The bidding started at $50. A miner with gaps in his teeth and hands like slabs of beef raised his number. Another joined, then another. Katherine felt her heart hammering against her ribs, each call from the crowd another nail in the coffin of the life she had imagined for herself. She had once dreamed of love, of a small house with a garden, of children who would know security and kindness. Those dreams felt like they belonged to another woman now, someone who had died the moment Thomas spoke those terrible words. Then a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd, deep and clear and absolutely certain. $500. The gathering went silent. $500 was more than most men in McGill saw in a year. It was a fortune, a sum that spoke of cattle ranches and silver claims, of wealth that did not belong in this dusty corner of Nevada where most people counted their money in coins, not bills. Katherine turned her head despite herself, searching for the source of that voice. He stood at the back of the crowd, a tall figure in a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Even from a distance, she could see the way men moved aside for him, creating a path as he stepped forward into the sunlight. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes the color of smoke or storm clouds. His face was all hard angles and stern lines, but there was something in the set of his jaw that suggested a man who did not make decisions lightly. "That is quite a sum, Mr. Everhart," the auctioneer said, and Katherine caught the note of deference in his voice. Whoever this man was, he commanded respect in McGill. "Are you certain?" "I do not say things I am not certain of," the man replied. His gaze moved to Katherine, held there for a long moment that made something flutter uncomfortably in her chest. $1,000. Someone in the crowd gasped. The auctioneer blinked rapidly, as though he could not quite believe what he had heard. "Sir, the current bid is only $500. You need not $1,000, the cowboy repeated, his voice harder now, brooking no argument. "For the woman and the cancellation of all debts owed by Thomas Dawson. I want it in writing that he owes nothing to anyone in this town or any other. The slate is clean." Katherine felt the world tilt beneath her feet. That was double what the debts had totaled, more than double if she was being honest about the inflated numbers Thomas's creditors had claimed. This stranger was not just buying her freedom from one fate, he was buying Thomas's freedom entirely. Why would anyone do such a thing? The auctioneer looked uncertain, glancing toward a group of hard-faced men standing to one side. These were the ones Thomas owed, the gamblers and loan sharks who had arranged this spectacle. Their leader, a man named Sullivan with oil-slick hair and a gold tooth, stepped forward with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "That is generous, Everhart, but the arrangement was for the girl to settle the debt. If you are paying, well, that is between you and young Dawson. He still owes us." Marcus Everhart, as Katherine now knew him to be called, turned that storm-cloud gaze on Sullivan. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but it carried a weight that made several men in the crowd shift nervously. "I was not making a suggestion, Sullivan. I am paying $1,000, and in exchange, you and your associates will forget Thomas Dawson exists. You will tear up his markers, you will never speak his name again, and you will certainly never darken his doorway. Are we clear?" Sullivan's smile faltered. "Now see here, you cannot just—" "I can." Marcus pulled a leather wallet from inside his coat, extracted a thick sheaf of bills that made Katherine's eyes widen. He counted out the money with deliberate care, his movements precise and unhurried. "This is more than you would have gotten from him in 10 lifetimes, and we both know it. Take the money, Sullivan. Walk away clean. Or refuse, and find out exactly how much influence you actually have in this town, compared to a man who owns half the cattle in the county and has the ear of the territorial governor." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Sullivan's jaw worked, his eyes darting from the money to Marcus's impassive face and back again. Finally, he snatched the bills from Marcus's hand, counted them twice, and jerked his head at his associates. "Fine. The Dawson debt is settled. But if that boy steps out of line again, he will not be your concern." Marcus's tone made it clear the conversation was over. He gestured to the auctioneer. "Draw up the papers. I want the debt cancellation in writing, signed by every man who held Dawson's markers." The next hour passed in a blur of signatures and legal language that Katherine barely understood. She stood to one side, her bound hands now freed, watching as Marcus Everhart methodically ensured that every detail was handled to his satisfaction. He was thorough, she realized, the kind of man who left nothing to chance. When it was done, when the papers were folded and tucked into his coat pocket, he finally turned to her. "Miss Dawson," he said, and his voice was gentler than it had been with the others, though still formal. "I have a horse waiting. We should go before this crowd decides to test whether I was bluffing about my influence." "You were not bluffing," she said. It was not a question. Something that might have been amusement flickered in his eyes. "No, I was not. But men like Sullivan have short memories when it comes to their pride. Come." He offered his arm, a gesture so unexpectedly courteous that Katherine hesitated before taking it. His forearm was solid beneath the fabric of his coat, corded with muscle from years of hard work. He led her through the crowd, which parted before them like water around a stone. Katherine caught sight of Thomas at the edge of the gathering, his face pale and drawn. Their eyes met for just an instant, and she saw shame there, and relief, and a desperate gratitude that made her feel sick. Marcus saw the direction of her gaze and followed it. His expression hardened into something cold and pitiless. He stopped, turning to face Thomas directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the suddenly silent crowd. "Your brother can rot now, Miss Dawson. As far as I am concerned, you have no family in this town. He sold you to save his own skin, and I have paid his debts, so you need never feel you owe him a moment of your time or an ounce of your forgiveness. If he is wise, he will leave Nevada and never return. If he is foolish enough to seek you out, he will answer to me." Thomas flinched as though struck. Katherine felt something break open inside her chest, a complicated tangle of grief and anger and a terrible, liberating relief. Marcus was right. Thomas had betrayed her in the worst possible way, and she owed him nothing. The realization was both painful and oddly freeing. Marcus did not wait for a response. He guided Katherine to where two horses waited, a large bay gelding and a smaller chestnut mare with kind eyes. He helped her into the mare's saddle with a hand that was steady and impersonal, then swung onto his own mount with practiced ease. "Where are we going?" Katherine asked as they started down the main street of McGill, leaving the whispers and stares behind them. "My ranch. It is about 15 miles south of here, in better country than this." He glanced at her, and for the first time she saw something almost uncertain in his expression. "I suppose we should talk about expectations. I did not do this with any improper intentions, Miss Dawson. You are not my property, regardless of what just transpired. What happens next is largely up to you." Katherine stared at him, trying to reconcile this statement with the fact that he had just spent a small fortune to purchase her at auction. "I do not understand. Why did you do it, then?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. The town fell away behind them, replaced by open country studded with sagebrush and juniper. Finally, he spoke, his words measured and careful. 3 years ago, my sister found herself in a similar situation. Different circumstances, but the same essential trap. A man she trusted betrayed her, and she ended up indebted to people who saw her as a commodity rather than a person. I was back east at the time, dealing with our father's estate, and by the time I got word and returned, it was too late. She had taken her own life rather than face what she thought was coming. Katherine's breath caught. "I am so sorry. I swore after that I would never stand by if I saw another woman in such a position. When I heard about the auction, about what your brother had done, I knew I had to act." He looked at her then, and the pain in his eyes was raw and honest. "I know I cannot save my sister, but perhaps I can offer you the choice she did not believe she had." They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip of hooves on hard, packed earth and the whisper of wind through the brush. Katherine's mind was reeling, trying to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning she had woken believing her life was over, that she would be sold to some brutal man who would use her and discard her. Now she was riding beside a stranger who had paid a fortune for her freedom and asked nothing in return. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. "What kind of choice?" she finally asked. Marcus adjusted his reins, considering his words. "I have a large house that is far too empty. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, does her best, but she is getting older and the work is too much for one person. You could stay and help her, earn wages like any employee. You could stay just long enough to save money for passage elsewhere if you wanted to leave Nevada entirely. Or you could stay and build a life here on your own terms. The point is, Miss Dawson, that the choice is yours. I am not your master and I am not your keeper. I am simply a man trying to do what he thinks is right." "That is incredibly generous." Katherine heard the skepticism in her own voice and winced, Forgive me, I do not mean to sound ungrateful. It is only that in my experience, men do not offer something for nothing. There is always a price. The price has already been paid, Marcus said quietly, and I paid it willingly. I ask nothing of you except that you allow yourself the chance at a better life than the one you were facing this morning. They created a rise, and the land opened up before them. The valley here was greener than around McGill, with actual grass growing in thick patches and a line of cottonwoods that marked the path of a creek. Cattle grazed in the distance, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. And there, nestled against the shoulder of a hill, stood a house that made Catherine's breath catch. It was not a mansion by any means, but compared to the rough cabins and weathered shacks of McGill, it looked like something from a different world. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides, real glass windows that caught the afternoon sun. A roof of proper shingles rather than the tar paper she was used to seeing. There was a barn behind it, equally well maintained, and several outbuildings that spoke of a working ranch run by someone who took pride in their property. "This is yours?" Katherine asked, unable to keep the awe from her voice. "It is. My father built it 30 years ago when he first came to Nevada. He was a dreamer, my father, thought he could make something permanent in this wild country. Turns out he was right, though it cost him everything to do it." Marcus's voice held a complicated mixture of pride and old grief. "I inherited it when he passed, along with the responsibility of keeping his dream alive. Some days that feels like the easiest thing in the world. Other days it feels impossible." They rode into the yard, and a Chinese woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60, with silver threading through her black hair and sharp eyes that took in the scene with quick intelligence. She said something in rapid Cantonese that made Marcus reply in the same language, his accent rough but understandable. The woman's eyebrows rose, and she turned to Katherine with an expression that was part curiosity, part sympathy. "Mrs. Chen, this is Miss Katherine Dawson," Marcus said, switching back to English. "She will be staying with us and helping with the household if she is willing. Miss Dawson, this is Mrs. Chen, who has been keeping this ranch from falling into complete chaos since before I was born." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound but smiled. "He exaggerates. The chaos I only prevent 3 days out of 7, the other 4 I join in." Her English was excellent, colored with an accent that spoke of years lived between 2 languages. She studied Katherine with eyes that seemed to see far more than Katherine was comfortable with. "You have had a terrible day, yes. Come inside. I make tea and you rest, and we talk about what happens next when you are not looking like you might fall over." Katherine found herself ushered into the house before she could protest. The interior was as well kept as the exterior, with furniture that was simple but solid and floors that gleamed with care. Mrs. Chen guided her to a kitchen that smelled of baking bread and herbs hanging to dry from the rafters. Marcus followed, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I should see to the horses," he said, but Mrs. Chen waved him off. "The horses wait. You sit. We all talk together so this girl knows what she is walking into." Marcus obeyed with the resignation of a man long accustomed to Mrs. Chen's commands. Katherine found herself seated at a worn wooden table with a cup of tea in her hands and 2 pairs of eyes watching her with varying degrees of concern. "I suppose you think I have lost my mind," Marcus said after a long moment. "Spending $1,000 on a stranger." "I think you did what your heart told you to do," Mrs. Chen replied before Katherine could speak. "Same as always. Sometimes this is wise, sometimes this is foolish. Today, I think it is kind, and kindness is never wasted, even when it is inconvenient." Katherine sipped her tea, letting the warmth spread through her chest. "Mr. Everhart, I need you to understand something. I am grateful, more grateful than I can express. But I also need to know what you truly expect. You say you want nothing, but people do not give away fortunes without reason. If there is something you need from me, please tell me now, so I can decide if I am able to provide it." Marcus met her eyes, and she was struck again by the directness of his gaze. "What I need, Miss Dawson, is to know that I did not stand by and let another woman suffer when I had the power to intervene. That is all. If you wish to repay me in some fashion, work hard, live well, and find some measure of happiness. That will be payment enough. And if I wanted to leave tomorrow, then I would give you money for the stage and wish you well." Katherine set down her teacup with a sharp click. "That is either the most genuinely good-hearted thing I have ever heard, or you are the most skilled liar I have ever met." "He is not a liar," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Stubborn, yes. Reckless with his own welfare, certainly, but dishonest. Never, if Marcus says a thing, he means it." Marcus looked faintly uncomfortable with this praise. He stood, pushing back from the table. "I will let you two get acquainted, Mrs. Chen can show you to a room where you can rest and refresh yourself. We keep country hours here, supper at 6. You are welcome to join us or take a tray in your room, whichever you prefer." He left before Katherine could respond, his boots echoing on the wooden floors. Mrs. Chen chuckled, shaking her head. "He does not know how to accept gratitude, makes him squirm like a fish on a line. But he is a good man, Miss Dawson. One of the few truly good men I have known in this territory. You can trust him, even if that feels impossible right now." Katherine wanted to believe her. She wanted desperately to believe that there were still good people in the world, that not everyone would betray her the way Thomas had. But trust was not something she could simply decide to feel. It would have to be earned, slowly and carefully, through actions rather than words. Mrs. Chen led her upstairs to a bedroom that was small but clean, with a real bed covered in quilts and a window that looked out over the valley. There was a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and wonder of wonders, the pitcher actually contained water. "You rest," Mrs. Chen said kindly. "I will bring you some clothes. You and I are nearly the same size, I think, and I have dresses I no longer wear. Tomorrow we talk about work, about what you know how to do and what you wish to learn. Today, you just breathe and remember that you are safe." Safe. The word felt foreign, like something in a language Katherine had forgotten how to speak. But as she washed her face and hands, as she sank onto the bed that was softer than anything she had slept on in years, she thought that perhaps, impossibly, it might be true. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, someone was knocking softly at her door. The light outside the window had shifted, grown golden with late afternoon. Katherine stood, smoothing her dress, and opened the door to find Mrs. Chen holding an armful of fabric. "I bring you 3 dresses," the older woman said, entering and laying them out on the bed. "This one is good for housework, sturdy. This one is prettier for when we have visitors or go to town. And this one is warmest for when the weather turns. We are high enough here that winter comes early and stays late. You will need warm things." The dresses were simple but well made, far nicer than the worn thing Katherine currently wore. She ran her fingers over the fabric, feeling the quality of the weave. "These are too fine for me to accept." "Nonsense. They sit in my closet doing nothing. Better they are worn and appreciated. Change now and come down to supper. We eat in the kitchen, just the 3 of us. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Katherine changed into the housework dress, a serviceable gray cotton that fit reasonably well, if a bit loose in the waist. When she made her way downstairs, Following the sound of voices and the smell of cooking, she found Marcus helping Mrs. Chen set the table. He had removed his coat and rolled up his sleeves, and Catherine was surprised to see how comfortably he moved in the domestic space, completely at ease with tasks that many men would consider beneath them. "Miss Dawson," he said when he saw her, and something in his expression shifted, became almost shy. "That dress suits you. I hope you are feeling somewhat recovered." "I am, thank you, and please call me Catherine. After everything that has happened today, formality seems rather unnecessary." "Catherine, then, and you should call me Marcus. We are not formal people here." They sat down to a meal of roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables from Mrs. Chen's garden. The food was simple but delicious, and Catherine realized she had not eaten since the night before. She had been too sick with dread that morning to manage breakfast. Now hunger overtook her, and she ate with an appetite that would have embarrassed her under other circumstances. "It is good to see someone appreciate my cooking," Mrs. Chen said with satisfaction. "Marcus, he eats like a bird unless I force him." "I eat normally," Marcus protested. "You simply cook enough for an army, because you work like 10 men and need the strength. When I find you asleep over your account books at midnight, I know you are not eating enough during the day." Their bickering was comfortable, familiar, the kind of affectionate sparring that spoke of deep mutual respect. Catherine found herself relaxing slightly, the knot of tension in her shoulders beginning to unwind. This place was not what she had expected. Then again, nothing about today had been what she expected. "Tell me about the ranch," she said when there was a lull in the conversation. "How many cattle do you run?" Marcus looked pleased by the question. "Around 800 head, though the number fluctuates. We move them to higher pastures in summer, bring them down before the snow sets in. I have 4 regular hands who live in the bunkhouse, and we hire on extras during roundup and branding. It is a good operation, profitable enough to be secure but small enough that I know every corner of the property." "Your father built all this." "He did, with help from Mrs. Chen's husband. They were partners in a sense, though the legal paperwork only has my father's name, the laws being what they are for Chinese immigrants." Marcus's voice held an edge of anger. "When Mr. Chen passed, my father made sure Mrs. Chen would always have a home here, and I have honored that promise. This ranch is as much hers as it is mine." Mrs. Chen reached over and patted his hand. "Your father was a good man, and you are his son. I am lucky in my friends." Catherine felt a pang of something like envy. To be part of something like this, a place built on loyalty and mutual care, seemed impossibly precious. Her own family, such as it was, had crumbled the moment it was tested. Thomas had taught her that blood meant nothing when weighed against self-interest. As if reading her thoughts, Marcus said quietly, "I meant what I said earlier, Catherine, about your brother. You do not owe him anything, least of all forgiveness. What he did was unforgivable." "He is still my brother," Catherine said, but the words felt hollow even to her own ears. "He stopped being your brother when he put you on that auction block. Family is not just blood. It is choosing to stand by someone even when it costs you. It is sacrifice and loyalty and love." Thomas demonstrated that he is capable of none of those things. Marcus's voice was hard, uncompromising. "I know I am a stranger to you, and you have no reason to trust my judgment, but I have seen men like your brother before. They take and take and take, and they call it love. They drain the people around them and then act wounded when those people finally have nothing left to give. You are better off without him." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely, refusing to cry at this table in front of these people who had shown her more kindness in a few hours than Thomas had in years. "I raised him," she whispered. "After our parents died, I was all he had. I thought if I just kept trying, kept sacrificing, he would eventually become the person I knew he could be. That was not your responsibility, Mrs. Chen said gently. You were a child yourself. You did more than anyone could reasonably expect. That he failed to become a good man is his failure, not yours. I know that intellectually, but knowing it and believing it are different things. Marcus nodded slowly. Yes, they are. It will take time. And I will not pretend that anger and grief are simple emotions that can be resolved with a few kind words. But you are here now, and you are safe, and you have the chance to build a life that is entirely your own. That is worth something. They finished the meal in thoughtful silence. Afterward, Marcus excused himself to check on the horses, and Mrs. Chen taught Katherine where everything was kept in the kitchen as they cleaned up together. It was strange, performing these mundane tasks in this unfamiliar place, but there was also something soothing about the routine. Katherine had always found comfort in work, in the simple satisfaction of a job done well. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in her small room, Katherine stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of her feelings. She was free, or as free as a woman could be in 1883 Nevada. She was safe, living in a beautiful house with kind people. She should be grateful, relieved, overjoyed. And she was all those things, but she was also angry and hurt and so very tired. The betrayal of what Thomas had done sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and cold and impossible to ignore. Marcus's words echoed in her mind. Your brother can rot now. They had been harsh, brutal even, but also somehow liberating. For years, Katherine had shaped her entire existence around Thomas, around trying to save him from himself. And what had it gotten her? A place on an auction block, her personhood reduced to a price tag. Maybe Marcus was right. Maybe the kindest thing she could do for herself was to let Thomas go, to stop trying to save someone who did not want to be saved. The thought made her feel both lighter and achingly sad. Letting go of Thomas meant letting go of the fantasy she had clung to, the belief that family meant something immutable and sacred. It meant accepting that some things, some people, could not be fixed no matter how much love you poured into them. Katherine wiped her eyes and rolled over, pulling the quilt up to her chin. Tomorrow she would begin to figure out what her new life looked like. Tonight, she would allow herself to grieve for the brother she had lost, if she had ever truly had him at all. The days that followed settled into a rhythm that Katherine found surprisingly comforting. She rose with the sun, helped Mrs. Chen prepare breakfast for Marcus and the ranch hands, and then spent the day working through the endless tasks that kept a household running. There was laundry to be done, though here they had the luxury of a real laundry room with a proper stove for heating water. There were meals to plan and prepare, floors to sweep, bread to bake, vegetables to preserve from Mrs. Chen's garden. The work was hard but satisfying, and Katherine threw herself into it with determination. Marcus was a steady presence, always polite, always respectful, but keeping a careful distance. He worked long hours on the ranch, often returning for supper smelling of horses and leather and open air. He would wash up at the pump outside, then join them in the kitchen for the meal. Afterward, he would retreat to his study to work on the accounts and correspondence that came with running a cattle operation. Katherine found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice, trying to understand this man who had upended her life with a single grand gesture. He was not what she had expected a wealthy rancher to be. There was no arrogance in him, no sense of entitlement. He treated the ranch hands with the same respect he showed Mrs. Chen, rolling up his sleeves and working alongside them when needed. She saw him mending fences, breaking a new horse, helping birth a calf when one of the cows had trouble. He did not ask anything of others that he was not willing to do himself. It was attractive. she realized with some surprise. Not just his physical appearance, though she had to admit he was handsome in a rough-hewn way, all lean muscle and strong hands and eyes that saw more than they revealed. It was his character that drew her attention, the way he moved through the world with quiet competence and an ironclad sense of right and wrong. She tried not to think about it too much. Gratitude and attraction were easy to confuse, and she had no intention of complicating her new situation with messy emotions. Marcus had been clear that he expected nothing from her, and she intended to respect that boundary even if her own feelings became less clear. 3 weeks after her arrival, Katherine was in the garden helping Mrs. Chen harvest the last of the summer squash when a rider appeared on the road leading to the ranch. Mrs. Chen straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and frowned. "That is the sheriff from McGill," she said. "I wonder what brings him here." Katherine felt her stomach drop. Had something happened? Had Thomas done something else foolish? She forced herself to keep working, pulling vegetables from the vine with hands that trembled slightly. The sheriff, a weathered man named Porter whom Katherine vaguely remembered from the auction, dismounted and spoke with Marcus, who had emerged from the barn. Their conversation was too far away for Katherine to hear, but she saw Marcus's expression darken. Finally, Marcus glanced toward the garden and gestured. The sheriff nodded and followed Marcus toward where Katherine and Mrs. Chen stood. "Miss Dawson," Sheriff Porter said, touching his hat brim, "I am sorry to disturb you, but I have some news about your brother." Katherine set down the squash she was holding, wiping her hands on her apron. "What has he done now?" "It is not what he has done, miss. It is what has been done to him. Thomas Dawson was found dead this morning behind the Silver Spur Saloon in McGill. Looks like he got into a fight, took a knife to the ribs. We are still investigating, but witnesses say he was drinking heavily and started an argument with some drifters passing through town." The world seemed to stop. Katherine heard the words, understood them individually, but they would not quite coalesce into meaning. Thomas was dead. Her brother, the boy she had raised, was gone. She waited for grief to overwhelm her, for tears to come, but all she felt was a strange numbness. Did he suffer? She heard herself ask. Porter looked uncomfortable. "The doctor says it would have been quick, miss, if that is any comfort." Marcus had moved closer, standing just behind Katherine's shoulder. She could feel his presence like a solid wall at her back, steady and reassuring. "Thank you for coming out to tell us, Sheriff. Is there anything that needs to be done? Arrangements to be made?" "The town will bury him in the paupers section of the cemetery unless Miss Dawson wishes to claim the body and make other arrangements. I will need to know by tomorrow." Katherine found her voice. "Bury him in the paupers section. I have no money for anything else, and I will not ask Mr. Everhart to spend any more on my brother than he already has." "If you wanted a proper burial, I would pay for it," Marcus said quietly. "You need only ask." "No." The word came out harder than Katherine intended. "No, he does not deserve any more of your money, and he does not deserve any more of my grief. Bury him where the town buries its forgotten. That is what he made himself." Sheriff Porter nodded slowly. "I understand, miss. I am sorry for your loss, regardless of the circumstances." After he left, Katherine stood in the garden, staring at her dirt-stained hands. She felt Marcus and Mrs. Chen watching her, waiting to see if she would break. But there were no tears, no dramatic collapse. There was just a hollow ache and a terrible sense of waste. "I should feel worse than this," she said finally. "I should be devastated. He was my brother. I loved him. But all I feel is angry that he threw his life away so carelessly, and relieved that I will never have to worry about him again." "What kind of person does that make me?" "A human one," Marcus said. He moved to stand in front of her, his eyes searching her face. "Katherine, you are allowed to feel however you feel. There is no correct way to grieve, especially when the relationship was as complicated as yours was with Thomas. He hurt you deeply, betrayed you in the worst possible way. It is natural that your feelings would be complicated. I keep thinking about when he was little, Katherine said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, distant and hollow. He used to follow me everywhere, this tiny shadow who thought I hung the moon. When did that change? When did he become someone I did not recognize? Mrs. Chen came and took Katherine's hand, squeezed it gently. People change as they grow. Sometimes they become better than we hoped, and sometimes they disappoint us. You gave Thomas every chance to be a good man. That he chose otherwise is not your failure. Katherine nodded, but the ache in her chest would not subside. She let Mrs. Chen guide her into the house. Let Marcus press a cup of whiskey into her hands and insist she drink it. She sat in the kitchen and stared at nothing while they talked quietly around her, their voices a soothing murmur that required no response. That night, the tears finally came. Katherine lay in her bed and wept for the brother she had lost years before he died, for the little boy who had needed her, for the man he could have become if he had made better choices. She cried for herself, too, for the years she had wasted trying to save someone who did not want to be saved, for the innocence she had lost believing that love and sacrifice were always enough. There was a soft knock at her door. Katherine sat up, wiping her face. "Come in." Marcus entered, carrying a lamp that cast warm light across the room. He looked uncertain, awkward in a way she had never seen him. "I heard you crying. I wanted to make sure you were all right, or as all right as you can be under the circumstances." "I do not know what I am," Katherine admitted. "I feel like I should have done more, saved him somehow, but I also know that I could not have changed anything. He made his choices." Marcus set the lamp on the dresser and sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "When my sister died, I blamed myself for months. If I had come back sooner, if I had noticed she was struggling, if I had sent more money, if. It nearly destroyed me, that guilt. Finally, Mrs. Chen sat me down and told me something I will never forget. She said that we cannot live other people's lives for them, cannot make their choices or bear their consequences. All we can do is love them and offer support and hope they choose wisely. If they do not, that is their burden to carry, not ours. It feels selfish to let go of the guilt." "It is not selfish. It is survival. And Katherine, you have already sacrificed so much for Thomas. You gave him your childhood, your youth, your security. You do not owe him your future as well, especially not now that he is gone." Katherine looked at Marcus in the lamplight, at the earnest concern in his face, and felt something shift inside her. This man, who barely knew her, had shown her more genuine care and compassion than her own brother ever had. He had paid a fortune for her freedom and asked nothing in return. He had defended her, sheltered her, and now sat with her in her grief even though it must be uncomfortable for him. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were careful, measured. "In the beginning, it was because I saw my sister in you, and I needed to do for you what I could not do for her. But these past few weeks, getting to know you, seeing how hard you work and how much strength you have, it has become about more than that. You are not just a symbol of my past regrets, Katherine. You are a remarkable person in your own right, and you deserve every good thing life can offer you." Something warm unfurled in Katherine's chest, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I do not feel very remarkable. I feel like someone who has made a long series of poor choices and ended up where she is through sheer luck. You survived. That alone is remarkable. And you did it with your kindness and your capacity for love intact, despite having every reason to become bitter and closed off. That is not luck, Katherine. That is strength of character. He stood, picking up the lamp. Try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be easier and the day after easier still. Grief is not a straight line, but it does fade with time. After he left, Katherine lay back down, but she did not fall asleep for a long time. She kept thinking about the way Marcus had looked at her, the gentleness in his voice. She thought about the person she was becoming in this place, freed from the burden of Thomas and the life she had known in McGill. It frightened her, how easy it would be to fall in love with Marcus Everhart, to let gratitude transform into something deeper and more complicated. But she was also tired of being afraid, tired of making herself small to accommodate other people's needs. Maybe it was time to be selfish, to reach for what she wanted instead of always sacrificing for others. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The next weeks passed in a blur of work and slowly healing grief. Katherine went into McGill for the day of Thomas's burial, stood at the graveside with Marcus beside her, and said a quiet goodbye to the brother he had been and the brother he had never become. It was a sparse affair, just her and Marcus and the preacher hired by the town. No one else came. Thomas had burned too many bridges in his short life to have friends who would mourn him. As they rode back to the ranch, Katherine felt lighter than she had in years. It was not happiness exactly, but it was the absence of a weight she had carried for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "Thank you for coming with me," she said to Marcus. "Of course. You should not have had to face that alone. I seem to say thank you to you constantly. I must sound like a broken record." Marcus smiled slightly. "You do not need to thank me for basic human decency, Katherine. It is not as basic as you seem to think. Most people would not have done what you have done for me. Then most people are content to be less than they could be. I am not interested in being most people." Katherine found herself smiling despite the solemnity of the day. "No, you certainly are not." As autumn deepened and the weather turned cooler, Katherine found herself settling into life at the ranch with increasing ease. She had always been good with figures, and Marcus discovered this when he found her reviewing the household accounts one evening. He had looked over her neat columns of income and expenditure with surprise, and then asked if she might be willing to help with the ranch books as well. They fell into a routine of working together in his study after supper several nights a week, Katherine managing the accounts while Marcus handled correspondence and planning. Those evenings became Katherine's favorite part of the day. There was something intimate about sitting together in the lamplight, the scratch of pen on paper the only sound between them. Sometimes they would talk, sharing stories of their pasts or discussing plans for the ranch. Other times they worked in companionable silence, content simply to be near each other. Katherine tried to ignore the way her heart sped up when Marcus leaned over her shoulder to check a calculation, bringing with him the scent of leather and sage. She tried not to notice the way his eyes would linger on her face when he thought she was absorbed in her work. But the awareness between them was growing, becoming harder to ignore with each passing day. One evening in early November, as the first snow of the season began to fall outside, Marcus set down his pen and looked at her across the desk. "Katherine, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me." Katherine's heart stuttered. "Of course. Are you happy here? Truly happy, or are you staying because you feel you have no other choice?" "I am happy," Katherine said, and realized as she spoke that it was true. "Happier than I have been in a very long time." "Why do you ask?" Marcus stood, moving to the window to watch the snow fall. "Because I need to know that if I tell you something, you will not feel pressured or obligated. I need to know that you feel free to speak your mind, even if what you have to say is not what I want to hear." Katherine set down her own pen, her pulse racing. You are frightening me, Marcus. What is this about? He turned to face her, and the expression on his face was more open and vulnerable than she had ever seen. These past months with you here have been the happiest of my life. You have brought light and warmth to this house. And more than that, you have become someone I look forward to seeing every morning and hate to say good night to every evening. I am falling in love with you, Katherine, and I do not know if that is something you could ever feel for me, or if the circumstances of how we met have made such a thing impossible. Katherine stood slowly, her legs trembling. You are falling in love with me. I am. I know it is complicated, and I know you might feel that any feelings you have for me are tangled up with gratitude or obligation. That is why I have tried so hard to keep my distance, to give you space to figure out who you are and what you want without pressure from me. But I cannot keep pretending I do not feel the way I feel. You deserve honesty, even if the truth is inconvenient. Katherine moved around the desk, crossing to where he stood. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself as though bracing for rejection. Marcus, I have spent weeks trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude, that it would be foolish to confuse appreciation with love. But I cannot lie to myself anymore. I am falling in love with you too. Maybe I have been since the day you stood in front of that crowd and told my brother he could rot. You were the first person in my life who put my welfare above someone else's convenience, and I will never forget what that meant to me. Marcus exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to release months of held tension. You are certain, because Katherine, if we do this, if we let ourselves explore these feelings, I need you to know that I am not a man who loves halfway. When I commit to something, to someone, it is with everything I have. I do not want you to feel trapped or pressured. I want you to choose me freely, knowing you could walk away at any time and I would not stop you. I do not want to walk away, Katherine said, and she reached up to touch his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble beneath her palm. I want to stay. I want to see where this goes. I want to choose you, Marcus, the way you chose me that day in McGill. He caught her hand, pressed his lips to her palm in a kiss that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. I will spend every day proving that you made the right choice. I swear it. You have already proven it. Now stop talking and kiss me properly. Marcus smiled, and it transformed his entire face, made him look younger and lighter than she had ever seen him. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. Katherine had been kissed before, clumsy, stolen moments with boys in her youth before responsibility consumed her life. But this was different. This was a kiss full of promise and reverence, a kiss that spoke of futures and commitment and love that had been earned rather than simply declared. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for months. You should have done it sooner, Katherine said, making him laugh. I was trying to be noble and respectful. Next time, try being a little less noble. They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other as the snow continued to fall outside. Katherine felt a sense of rightness settle over her, a certainty that this was where she was meant to be. All the pain and betrayal and fear that had brought her to this moment suddenly felt worthwhile, because they had led her here to this man, to this life. Mrs. Chen found them the next morning at breakfast, sitting closer together than usual and sharing small smiles across the table. She took one look at them and chuckled. Finally, I was beginning to think you were both fools who would dance around each other forever. You knew, Katherine asked, surprised. Of course I knew. Everyone knew except apparently you two. The ranch hands have had a betting pool going for 6 weeks on when you would finally admit your feelings. Marcus looked mortified. They have not. They have. Jackson the foreman won, by the way. He predicted early November. Very perceptive man, Jackson. Katherine laughed, feeling lighter than air. Well, I hope he enjoys his winnings. The next months were the happiest of Katherine's life. She and Marcus courted properly, taking walks through the snowy landscape, sitting together by the fire in the evenings, learning each other's hopes and dreams and fears. Marcus was attentive without being overbearing, affectionate without being presumptuous. He asked about her past, really listening when she spoke about the pain of losing her parents and the complicated grief of Thomas's death. In turn, he shared his own struggles, the pressure of living up to his father's legacy, the guilt he still carried over his sister. "I think she would have liked you," he said one evening as they sat watching the fire. "My sister Sarah, she would have admired your strength." "I would have liked to meet her," Katherine said softly. "I am sorry that I cannot. In a way, she brought us together. If not for her, I might not have had the courage to intervene that day in McGill. So perhaps she is still looking out for me, making sure I do not spend my life alone." At Christmas, Marcus gave Katherine a ring. It was simple, a gold band with a small ruby that had belonged to his grandmother. He presented it to her on Christmas morning in front of Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands who had been invited to the house for dinner. "Katherine Dawson," he said, taking her hand in his, "you have brought joy and purpose and love into my life. You have made this house a home in ways I never imagined possible. Would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Katherine could barely see through her tears. "Yes, yes, Marcus, I will marry you." The men cheered and Mrs. Chen cried happy tears, and Marcus slipped the ring onto Katherine's finger where it fit perfectly. They kissed to more cheers and wolf whistles, and Katherine thought that she had never been happier than in this moment, surrounded by people who had become her family, loved by a man who saw her worth and cherished it. They married in early spring of 1884, in a simple ceremony at the ranch with the preacher from McGill officiating. Katherine wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, and Marcus wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Chen stood as Katherine's witness, and Jackson the foreman stood for Marcus. It was small and perfect, everything a wedding should be. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a slow exploration of each other that left Katherine feeling cherished and desired in ways she had never imagined. Marcus was patient and attentive, making sure she felt safe and loved every moment. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the big bed that had been his and was now theirs, Katherine felt a sense of profound gratitude for the strange path that had led her to this moment. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, running his fingers through her unbound hair. "I am thinking about how wrong I was, that day in McGill. I thought my life was over, but it was really just beginning. I was so afraid, and now I cannot imagine being anywhere but here with you. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I know you will. That is why I love you." The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. Running a ranch required endless work, and there were droughts and sick cattle and broken fences and all the thousand small disasters that came with trying to wrest a living from difficult land. But Marcus and Katherine faced them together, partners in every sense of the word. Katherine took over more of the ranch management, freeing Marcus to focus on the livestock and land. They made a good team, each bringing strengths that complemented the other. Mrs. Chen grew older but remained a vital presence in their lives, a grandmother figure who dispensed wisdom and affection in equal measure. Katherine learned to cook Chinese dishes from her, and in turn taught her some of the baking techniques Katherine's mother had passed down. The kitchen became a place of laughter and storytelling, filled with the sense of two cultures blending into something new and wonderful. In the fall of 1884, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Marcus one evening after supper, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes widened, and then he whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around despite her laughing protests. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "Katherine, we are going to be parents." "I certainly hope you are surprised in a good way," she said when he finally set her down. "The best way. The very best way." He knelt and pressed a kiss to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I promise to do my best by you, to give you a life full of love and security, and all the things your mother and I did not always have." Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "They are lucky to have you as a father. They are lucky to have you as a mother. You are the strongest, most capable, most loving person I know." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the work became harder. But Marcus was endlessly patient, taking on extra tasks without complaint and making sure she rested as much as possible. Mrs. Chen hovered and fussed, preparing special teas and foods meant to ease Katherine's discomfort. In early June of 1885, after a long and difficult labor, Katherine gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him James after Marcus's father. When Marcus held his son for the first time, Katherine saw tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "Katherine, he is absolutely perfect." "He looks like you," Katherine said tiredly, studying the baby's dark hair and the shape of his little face. "He has your nose, and I think your stubbornness, judging by how long he made us wait to meet him." The early months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a colicky baby who did not sleep well, and Katherine and Marcus took turns walking him at night, pacing the floor while singing lullabies and wondering if they would ever sleep again. But there were also moments of pure magic, watching James discover the world, seeing his first smile, hearing his first laugh. Mrs. Chen was an invaluable help, teaching Katherine all the tricks she had learned raising her own children decades ago in China. The older woman doted on James, and he seemed to settle best when she held him, calmed by her soft singing in Cantonese. As James grew into a toddler, Katherine found herself pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and while the pregnancy was still uncomfortable, it felt more manageable. In April of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Marcus's sister. The baby had Katherine's auburn hair and eyes that seemed to shift between gray and green depending on the light. "She is going to be trouble," Marcus said, studying his daughter's alert expression. "I can already tell." "Takes after her mother, then," Katherine replied with a tired smile. "Absolutely, and I would not have it any other way." The years passed with the kind of busy contentment that Katherine had once thought was reserved for other luckier people. She and Marcus worked the ranch together, watching it grow and prosper. They raised their children with love and discipline, teaching them to be kind and hardworking and honest. James proved to have his father's way with horses, while Sarah was fascinated by the ranch books and figures, often sitting with Katherine in the study to help with the accounts. Mrs. Chen remained with them until she passed peacefully in her sleep in 1890, at the age of 68. They buried her on a hill overlooking the ranch, in a spot where she had loved to sit and watch the sunset. Katherine grieved deeply for the woman who had become like a mother to her, who had taught her so much about strength and resilience and the true meaning of family. "She gave me her blessing, you know," Katherine told Marcus on the day of the funeral. "When we first started courting, She pulled me aside and told me that you were one of the good ones and I should hold on to you with both hands. She was right, Marcus said, pulling Katherine close. Though I think I am the one who should be holding on, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. In 1892, Katherine gave birth to their third and final child, another boy they named Thomas. It had been Katherine's idea, and Marcus had looked uncertain when she suggested it. Are you sure? After everything your brother did, I am sure. My brother made terrible choices, but he was still the little boy I raised, the child I loved. Naming our son after him feels like reclaiming something, honoring the good that was in him before it got lost. Does that make sense? It does. And I think it is a beautiful gesture. Your capacity for forgiveness astounds me. Thomas the younger was an easy baby, cheerful and placid where James had been fussy and Sarah had been demanding. He seemed content to watch the world go by, happy as long as he was held and fed. Katherine felt her family was complete, felt a deep sense of satisfaction in the life she and Marcus had built together. The ranch continued to prosper. Marcus expanded their holdings, buying adjacent land when it became available and slowly building an operation that was respected throughout Nevada. He was known as a fair employer, paying his hands well and treating them with respect. Several Chinese families settled on land Marcus leased to them, creating a small community that enriched the entire area. Katherine became involved in the territorial movement for women's suffrage, attending meetings and writing letters to legislators. Marcus supported her completely, even when some of their neighbors muttered about uppity women who did not know their place. You know your place better than anyone, he told her, and your place is wherever you choose to stand and make your voice heard. I am proud of you, Katherine. I am proud of your courage and your convictions. In November of 1894, Nevada granted women the right to vote in school board elections. It was a small victory, but Katherine celebrated it with the knowledge that it was a step toward something larger. She cast her first vote in early 1895, with Marcus and the children watching proudly. James, now nearly 10, asked why it was such a big deal. Because for a long time, people thought women were not smart enough or capable enough to have a say in how things were run, Katherine explained. And now we are proving them wrong, one election at a time. That is stupid, Sarah declared with all the fierce certainty of a 7-year-old. You are the smartest person I know, Mama, smarter than Papa even. Hey now, Marcus protested with mock indignation. I am standing right here. It is true, Papa, James said seriously. Mama knows everything. Katherine laughed and gathered her children close. I certainly do not know everything, my loves, but I am learning every single day, and so are you. As the children grew, they began to understand more of their parents' story. James was 12 when he asked how his parents had met. Katherine and Marcus exchanged a long look, and then Katherine told a carefully edited version of the truth. She explained that her brother had been in trouble and that Marcus had helped them both, and that they had fallen in love while Katherine was living at the ranch. So Papa saved you? Sarah asked, her eyes wide. In a way, yes. But I also saved myself by choosing to build a new life instead of staying trapped in an old one. And your father gave me the space and support to do that, which is the greatest gift anyone can give another person. I want to be like Papa when I grow up, Thomas said firmly. The youngest child worshipped his father, following him around the ranch whenever possible. Then be brave and kind and willing to stand up for what is right, even when it is hard, Marcus said, ruffling his son's hair. That is what being a good man means. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Katherine and Marcus celebrated their 16th wedding anniversary. They stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the valley that had become their whole world. The children were inside, arguing companionably about something that would be forgotten by morning. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the horses drowsing in the barn. "You ever think about that day in McGill?" Marcus asked, his arm around Katherine's waist. "Sometimes. Usually when I want to remind myself how far we have come, how much has changed. I think about it often. I think about how close I came to not being there, to not acting. I had almost decided to stay home that day, to send Jackson into town for supplies instead. If I had, we never would have met. But you did go. You did act. And you changed everything, Marcus. Not just for me, but for our children, for everyone whose lives have been touched by this family we have built. That matters more than you know. I would do it again in a heartbeat. 1,000 times over, if that is what it took to end up here, with you, with this life." Katherine turned in his arms, looking up at the face she knew as well as her own. There were lines around his eyes now, silver threading through his dark hair, but he was still the man who had stood in that crowd and said, "Your brother can rot now," with such fierce conviction. He was still the man who had offered her freedom and asked nothing in return. He was still and would always be the great love of her life. "I love you, Marcus Everhart," she said, "more than I can express in words. I love you too, Katherine, today, tomorrow, and all the days after that, forever." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky. Two people who had found each other through pain and chance and a single moment of fierce courage. Behind them, their children's laughter drifted through the open windows. Around them, the ranch they had built together stood solid and prosperous. And ahead of them stretched a future full of promise, a life they had chosen and fought for and earned. The years continued to pass in the comfortable rhythm of family life and ranch work. James grew into a fine young man who shared his father's gift with animals and his mother's head for business. At 18, he began taking on more responsibility for the ranch operations, working alongside Marcus to learn every aspect of the business. Sarah proved to be whip-smart and ambitious, determined to attend university despite the raised eyebrows of their neighbors. Katherine and Marcus supported her completely, saving money for her education and encouraging her dreams. Thomas the younger, meanwhile, discovered a talent for working with wood. He spent hours in the workshop Marcus built for him, crafting furniture and tools with a precision that amazed his parents. By the time he was 15, his pieces were in demand throughout the county. In 1905, Katherine's youngest child turned 13, and she found herself with more time than she had had in years. She threw herself into the suffrage movement with renewed energy, traveling to meetings across Nevada and even to California to coordinate with activists there. Marcus missed her when she was gone but never complained, understanding that this work was important to her. "My mother would have loved you," he told her one evening after she returned from a particularly successful trip. She believed women were just as capable as men, just as deserving of rights and respect. It was ahead of her time, that belief. "She sounds like she was a remarkable woman." She was. She would have been proud to see what you are accomplishing, how you are fighting to make the world better for our daughter and all the daughters who will come after. In October of 1914, Nevada granted full voting rights to women, 6 years before the federal amendment would do the same nationwide. Katherine cast her ballot with tears of joy streaming down her face, thinking of all the women who had fought for this moment and all those who would benefit from it in the years to come. By then, her children were grown and starting families of their own. James had married a rancher's daughter named Elizabeth, and they were expecting Katherine and Marcus's first grandchild. Sarah was attending university in California, studying to become a lawyer despite the obstacles placed in her way. Thomas had opened his own carpentry business in McGill, which had grown considerably since Katherine's time there. Katherine and Marcus found themselves with an empty nest for the first time since James's birth, 29 years earlier. It was strange and a little sad, but also liberating in its own way. They took trips together, traveling to San Francisco and Denver and even, one memorable summer, to New York City. They explored the country that had once seemed so vast and dangerous, finding it full of wonders they had never imagined. But they always returned to the ranch, to the home they had built together. It was where they belonged, where their roots went deep into the Nevada soil. In the spring of 1915, James and Elizabeth had their first child, a boy they named Marcus James. Katherine held her grandson for the first time and felt a profound sense of continuity, of life moving forward in its endless cycle. This child would grow up in a world shaped by the choices his grandparents had made, the battles they had fought, the love they had built. He would never know what it was like to see his grandmother on an auction block, would never understand how close she had come to a life of servitude and despair. And that, Katherine thought, was exactly as it should be. "What are you thinking?" Marcus asked, watching her cradle the baby. "I am thinking about how lucky we are, how lucky I am. If you had not been in McGill that day, if you had not had the courage to act, none of this would exist. Our children, this grandchild, the life we have built together, it all came from one moment of profound kindness." "It was not kindness," Marcus said softly. "It was love, even though I did not know it yet. I took one look at you standing on that platform, so brave and so afraid, and something in my heart recognized you. Recognized that you were meant to be mine, and I was meant to be yours. Everything that came after was just the unfolding of that truth." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. Even after more than 30 years together, Marcus could still make her heart flutter with his words. "You are a romantic, Marcus Everhart. Only when it comes to you." As the years advanced, Katherine and Marcus settled into the comfortable rhythms of grandparenthood and ranch life. They were not as young as they once were, could not work as hard or as long, but they remained active and engaged. Marcus still rode out to check on the cattle, though now he took James or one of the hands with him. Katherine still managed the books, though increasingly Sarah, home from law school, helped her with the more complex matters. They celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. There were 5 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 9 years to 6 months, and the house rang with the sounds of their play and laughter. Katherine looked around the table at the faces of the family she and Marcus had created and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. "Speech, Mama," Sarah called out, and the others took up the chant. Katherine stood, her joints protesting slightly, and raised her glass. 40 years ago, I stood on an auction block in McGill, Nevada, and believed my life was over. I thought I had nothing left, no future, no hope. And then this man, this good and brave man, stepped forward and changed everything. He gave me freedom and safety and eventually his heart, and in return, I have tried every day to be worthy of that gift. We have built a life together that has exceeded my wildest dreams. We have raised 3 wonderful children who are now raising wonderful children of their own. We have weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs, and through it all, we have had each other. Marcus, you are my partner, my love, my dearest friend. Here is to 40 more years if God is willing." "Hear, hear!" The gathered family chorused, raising their glasses. Marcus stood and kissed her, long and sweet, while their grandchildren made exaggerated sounds of disgust and their children laughed. When they finally parted, Marcus added his own toast. "To Katherine, the strongest woman I have ever known and the love of my life. You have made every day an adventure and every year a blessing. I am the luckiest man alive." That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Katherine and Marcus sat on the porch together as they had done countless times over the decades. The Nevada night was clear and cold, the stars brilliant overhead. "You have any regrets?" Katherine asked. "Anything you wish you had done differently?" Marcus was quiet for a long time, considering. "No," he finally said. "Every choice, even the difficult ones, led us here. I cannot regret any of it. Not even spending $1,000 on a stubborn woman at an auction," Marcus laughed. "Especially not that. Best money I ever spent. Though you turned out to be far more expensive in the long run, what with the children and the grandchildren and your insistence on feeding every stray cat that wanders onto the property. Those cats earn their keep catching mice. Some of them. The others just sit in sunbeams looking smug." Katherine smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I love you, you know. Even after all this time, even knowing all your faults and irritating habits, I love you with my whole heart. And I love you. More than I can say, more than I can show, but I will keep trying until my last breath." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. The ranch stretched around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their hard work and shared vision. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren slept, safe and secure in the home Katherine and Marcus had created. Katherine thought about the girl she had been, standing on that auction block with her hands bound and her future uncertain. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and loved and surrounded by family. And she thought about the man sitting beside her, who had seen her worth when the world wanted to reduce her to a price tag, who had loved her with patience and passion for more than 4 decades. "Your brother can rot now," he had said all those years ago, and in that moment he had freed her from more than just Thomas's debts. He had freed her from the belief that she was worth less than a man's convenience, from the idea that sacrifice and suffering were her only purposes. He had shown her that she deserved love and respect and happiness, and then he had spent the rest of his life proving it. As the night deepened and the air grew colder, Marcus stood and offered Katherine his hand. "Come inside, my love. It is too cold to sit out here much longer." Katherine took his hand, letting him help her to her feet. They walked inside together, their fingers intertwined, their steps matched after so many years of walking side by side. Behind them, the Nevada night settled over the ranch, peaceful and still. And inside the house they had built together, Katherine and Marcus climbed the stairs to their bedroom, ready to sleep in each other's arms as they had done for thousands of nights before. The story that had begun with an auction block and a cowboy's defiant declaration had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of courage and kindness, and the unshakable belief that every person deserves dignity and choice. Katherine Dawson had been sold to pay her brother's debts. Marcus Everhart had paid double and told that brother he could rot. And from that brutal beginning had grown something beautiful and lasting, a family and a legacy and a love that would endure long after they were both gone. In the years that followed, Katherine and Marcus continued to age gracefully together, their love only deepening with time. They saw the world change around them, watched as automobiles replaced horses and electricity came to even remote ranches like theirs. They adapted when they could, held firm to their values when adaptation meant compromise they could not accept. Sarah became the first female lawyer in Nevada to argue a case before the state Supreme Court. James expanded the ranch until it was one of the largest operations in the county. Thomas's furniture appeared in homes across 3 states, each piece a small work of art. Katherine and Marcus watched their children succeed and stumble and pick themselves up again, offering advice when asked and unconditional love always. The grandchildren grew, and great-grandchildren began to appear. Katherine held each new baby with wonder, marveling at the infinite possibilities contained in those tiny bodies. She told them stories of the old days, of what Nevada had been like when she was young, of the struggles and triumphs that had shaped their family. She wanted them to understand where they came from, to appreciate the sacrifices that had been made so they could live in freedom and security. Marcus remained her constant companion through all of it, her partner in every sense of the word. They still worked together on the ranch accounts, still took evening walks when the weather was fine, still kissed good morning and good night with the same tenderness they had shown as newlyweds. The passion had mellowed with age, but it had been replaced by something deeper and more enduring, a love that had been tested by time and found unbreakable. On a clear autumn day in 1932, Marcus collapsed while checking on the cattle. James found him and brought him home, and the doctor came out from McGill to examine him. The verdict was clear. Marcus's heart was giving out. The doctor gave him months, maybe a year if he was careful. Marcus was not careful. He continued to work the ranch, continued to live fully, because he said spending his remaining time wrapped in cotton wool was no way to honor the life he had been given. Katherine wanted to argue but knew it would do no good. Marcus had always lived on his own terms, and he would die the same way. They made the most of the time they had left. Marcus made sure all his affairs were in order, that James knew everything he needed to know to run the ranch, that Katherine would be taken care of for the rest of her life. But mostly they just spent time together, talking about the life they had shared and the love that had sustained them. "I am not afraid of dying," Marcus told Katherine one evening as they sat watching the sunset from their porch. "I have lived a full and happy life. My only regret is leaving you behind." "You will never leave me," Katherine said fiercely, gripping his hand. "A love like ours does not end just because one of us is gone. You will be with me always, in every memory, in every lesson you taught our children, in this ranch we built together. Death cannot touch that." Marcus raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "You have been the joy of my life, Katherine Everhart. Every day with you has been a gift. Promise me you will keep living after I am gone, that you will not just exist but truly live. Promise me you will keep fighting for the things you believe in, keep loving our family, keep being the remarkable woman you have always been." "I promise," Katherine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But I will miss you every moment of every day. And I will be waiting for you, wherever we go after this. I will be waiting, and when your time comes, I will be the first face you see. That is my promise to you." Marcus Everhart passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold December night in 1932, with Katherine beside him as she had been for 48 years. He was 75 years old and had lived to see his children grown and successful, his grandchildren thriving, and his great-grandchildren beginning their own journeys. He had built a legacy of integrity and kindness that would endure for generations. The funeral was the largest McGill had ever seen. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to a man who had been fair and honest and generous throughout his long life. Katherine stood beside the grave, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the love of her life. She did not break down, did not dissolve into hysterics. Instead, she stood straight and proud, honoring Marcus's memory by showing the same strength he had always admired in her. After the funeral, after the mourners had gone home and the house was quiet again, Katherine went to the study where she and Marcus had spent so many evenings working side by side. She sat at the desk and pulled out a sheaf of paper and began to write. She wrote about a girl on an auction block and a cowboy who paid double. She wrote about falling in love and building a life and raising a family. She wrote about 48 years of marriage that had begun with a brutal transaction and transformed into something beautiful beyond measure. It took her months to finish, working a little bit each day. When it was done, she had a complete account of their life together, a record for her children and grandchildren and all the generations yet to come. She wanted them to know the truth of where they came from, the courage and love that had founded their family. Katherine lived another 12 years after Marcus's death, remaining active and engaged until the very end. She continued to work for women's rights, saw her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, and watched the world change in ways both wonderful and terrible. But through it all, she carried Marcus with her, felt his presence in every decision she made, every choice that echoed the values he had taught her. She passed away in her sleep in the spring of 1944, at the age of 83. Her children buried her next to Marcus on the hill overlooking the ranch, under a headstone that read, Katherine Dawson Everhart. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she was sold, but she could never be bought. Her spirit remained forever free. The ranch continued in the family for generations after, each new steward adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the foundation Marcus and Katherine had laid. The manuscript Katherine had written became a treasured family heirloom, passed down and read by each new generation. It reminded them of where they came from, of the courage it had taken to build something lasting from a moment of darkness. And in McGill, Nevada, where the story had begun on an auction block more than 60 years earlier, older residents still told the tale of the cowboy who paid double and told a woman's brother he could rot, of the love story that had followed, and of the family that had become a cornerstone of the community. It became part of local legend, a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Old West, love and courage could triumph over greed and betrayal. The house Marcus built still stood well into the 21st century, preserved by the family as a monument to their remarkable ancestors. Visitors could walk the rooms where Katherine and Marcus had lived and loved, see the desk where they had worked together, stand on the porch where they had watched countless sunsets. And those who knew the full story would stand there and reflect on how one moment of defiant kindness had changed everything, had created a legacy that endured long after the principals were dust. Katherine Dawson had been sold to pay her brother's debts. Marcus Everhart had paid double and said, "Your brother can rot now." And from that beginning, from that moment of fierce protection and recognition, had grown a love that transcended time and circumstance, a partnership that had weathered every storm, and a family that would carry their legacy forward for generations uncounted. It was, in every sense, a love story for the ages, proof that even in the darkest moments, hope and happiness could be found by those brave enough to reach for them. Their story ended not with their deaths, but with the continuation of the life they had built together, the family they had raised, and the values they had instilled. Every child who grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, every woman who fought for her rights and won, every person who chose kindness over cruelty, carried a piece of Katherine and Marcus forward into the future. Their love had not just changed two lives on a dusty auction block in 1883 Nevada. It had changed the world, one small act of courage at a time, rippling outward in ways they could never have imagined but would have been proud to claim. And that, in the end, was the truest measure of their love. Not just that it had sustained them through 48 years of marriage, but that it had created something larger than themselves, a legacy of hope and strength that would endure as long as their story was told and remembered. The cowboy and the woman he saved had become legend. But more importantly, they had lived a life of love and purpose that made the legend pale in comparison to the beautiful, complicated, deeply human reality.